There are literally hundreds of companies all over the world which develop and sell surveillance technologies which are used to spy on people, their phones, and the internet, making everything from malware which is used by governments to hack into phones to mass internet surveillance tools which can monitor entire countries' internet traffic. One of the main producers of this technology is Italy, which has been home to some of the most infamous surveillance companies in the industry. To find out why, I spoke to two investigative journalists, Lorenzo and Riccardo from IRPI Media, who have been digging into some of the most important companies, tracking this industry, and how it's managed to thrive by capturing government decision-making. Enjoy.
Okay, Riccardo and Lorenzo, thank you so much for your time today. Could you just kind of briefly describe IRPI Media and how you got involved?
Yeah, IRPI Media is the first investigative web magazine in Italy. We are the media outlet of IRPI, which stands for Investigative Reporting Project Italy. We are a center for investigative journalism, and we are trying to cover surveillance since a couple of years at least, with a number of contributors, and among them there is Riccardo, and that's why we teamed up for this investigation.
Fantastic. How did you both get into investigative journalism? I'm always fascinated with people's journeys.
For me, it was, since the School of Journalism, I was fascinated by investigation. And I realized that it was easier trying to do cross-border investigation just rather than national investigation, because there was a broader audience first, and there was a broader number of colleagues keen in collaborating with cross-border topics. And mafia is a very fascinating one subject, and Italian reporters are there's a high demand for mafia expert abroad, and that's how I found myself in investigative journalism.
So your kind of background is in investigating the mafia then?
That was the starting point, yeah. And that was the first expertise IRPI had at the very beginning. Now we try to cover more subject, but at the beginning we were basically the Italian reporters covering mafia everywhere in the world.
Wow. And then you moved on to something safer like government spy agencies.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what about you, Riccardo?
Yeah, for me, it's a different story because my background is I got a master's degree in mechatronic engineering. Wow. So I was on the side of studying technology and how it works. And then during my master thesis, I realized that there was something missing in this whole technology sphere. So like no real critical thinking in there. And I was also fascinating while I was younger about journalism. So I tried to start writing about journalism, about tech and journalism. And then in the end, I ended up with this like huge curiosity regarding the surveillance market in Italy. I've seen there were like stories, infamous companies and so on. So I was like, okay, I would really like to dig into this. And then I met the guys from IRPI and IRPI Media, and yeah, I started collaborating with them. That was the spark that led me to the surveillance sector in Italy.
Brilliant, man. You've gone from a slightly kind of more lucrative industry in engineering to a bit of a less lucrative investigative journalism, but far more interesting, surely. I can imagine.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I think today we're going to talk about, I think, the most recent stories that you've published. You published them in Italian first, and we're recording before the English versions, but the English versions are published as well by the time this goes out. Should we maybe start on the first story, on Cyphergate?
The first story is about this Italian company, which is quite new, and it's training and it's gaining in momentum, at least in Italy and also abroad. The name of the company is Cyphergate. This company basically sells a wide range of products that go from active surveillance and intrusion to cybersecurity. So they offer both the offensive and defensive ones. In our first article, we dig into the offensive ones because what was interesting about them is that they describe themselves as the new leader in this market, and as a benchmark, they put in their internal documents and presentations the name of two infamous companies, which are Palantir and NSO. This is why we focused on them. Their offensive tools are quite interesting because they both sell a product which is a sort of business intelligence platform called DSINT, meaning digital signal intelligence. And this platform looks like the tools that Palantir offers. So basically, it scrapes and collects information from the open web, so social media accounts and other kind of data sets. And then thanks to algorithm, it can extract information from this data. An algorithm meaning that they have natural language processing algorithms, so they can extract meaning from this data, but they also include facial recognition, object recognition. So in this way, they can also like do a search via images and so on. This is interesting, this decent platform, because they describe this as a tools to get the right information at the right time, at the right place. So they try to sell this technology both to the corporate sector and also to the government one. So it's as if they want to cover the entire business. The other tool that we dig into was the lawful interception system, which is called EPEIUS. And this is like the tool that Cyphergate wants to use to enter into the market following the footsteps of NSO. This EPEIUS tool is already used by some prosecutor offices in Italy. It's basically a spyware. They use this to retrieve data from smartphones. So they can subtle inject this spyware, this EPEIUS in smartphones, and they can collect images, chats, calendars, contacts, emails, and so on. It's quite interesting because given that they gave these two pretty impressive benchmarks, Palantir and NSO, it's as if they, although we all know the backstory of these two companies, so Palantir is selling social media intelligence tools that help to surveil and monitor social media. They work for the Pentagon, CIA, they are like quite famous, and NSO as well, with this recent story of abuse of their spyware. It was interesting to see how come that they put a benchmark with these companies. Were they concerned about what these companies were doing? Is Cyphergate willing to follow in the rabbit hole what these two companies have done? Are they concerned or not? And this was quite interesting to see that it doesn't really look that like, given also that we tried to see in which kind of countries they want to sell.
An addition about the context. One of the interests for us in Cyphergate was also the corporate structure, because Cyphergate is controlled by a company called Elettronica, which is partially controlled by Leonardo, which is a public state company. Every time that we try to investigate the surveillance system in Italy, we basically found out a kind of connection with Leonardo. Leonardo is always there because it's the Italian champion in the industry. And in this case, also through a long list of partnership, which has not been explicited sometimes, but which are there anyway. Leonardo is trying to use companies like Cyphergate to basically expand his network of collaboration with countries and in sectors that are not particularly interesting for Leonardo as company by itself. But it's a kind of broader system with Leonardo as the main pillar to support everyone.
Did Leonardo buy CipherGate, or did
no? There's just it's just a partnership contract, but still there's a partnership contract, and there is also a share in the shareholder of CipherGate.
Right, okay.
So on paper, the connection seems very weak. But if you look at the big picture, at the full picture, there are more connections, and also the aim is always the same. They're trying to, especially Leonardo in the last couple of years, the company is trying to say explicitly that they want to set up a system of companies with the same aim to protect and safeguard the Italian interest. Obviously, through softwares and product to surveil and to export this kind of system also elsewhere in other countries. And that's how we start digging into the connection with the UAE, because CipherGate as in their list of clients, there is also Mubadala, which is a joint, which is a development fund based in Abu Dhabi, and this investment fund in Abu Dhabi is basically trying to set up a proper system, national system of companies involved in the surveillance market in the Gulf area, and CipherGate is among the provider of the technology. One of the problems in this case for investigative journalists is trying to find the license export to understand exactly what is the features of the product sold in a context like the UAE, which are not a safe country, especially in terms of human rights violations.
Right, because it's not like there's just somewhere you can go to see which technologies a surveillance company has sold, or even the level of transparency as compared to, for example, if they were selling military equipment.
Exactly, and this is exactly the case. One of the problems with the product of CipherGate is that they are labeled as dual use, because they can be used for military and for civil purposes. And in this case, according to the replies we received from CipherGate, the products sold in the UAE are civil goods, so there's no license at all. So basically, you can try to find out what kind of product are sold only through internal documents and through internal presentation, tweets, press release, and documents coming directly from the company.
And you're trying to find out basically how a very well-connected secretive spy agency is selling to a very secretive and powerful intelligence agency. That's the task, basically.
Yeah, that's the task. And again, one of the way in this specific context, one of the interesting aspect was also the internal fight among the Emirati and among the different princes of the Emirati in order to control the surveillance industry in the countries. And I mean, probably, because this is just an assumption, we can say, thanks to the evidence we have, but this is still an assumption, CipherGate is participating to this internal fight in the Emirati, because Mubadala, the client we mentioned before, belongs basically to one of the galaxy of one of these princes who wants to take over the control of the surveillance industry in the UAE. And I mean, in this case, we are talking about geopolitical consequences of the choice made by the company to sell their product in a country unstable and unsafe like the UAE. And this is why this story matters. And this is why this story has consequences that goes beyond the simple selling of a surveillance tool. There is more than this. There are political consequences for this.
And like, what is the record of using surveillance in the Emirates? Because it's usually kind of held up as somewhat of more economically progressive part of the Gulf region. Do you know anything about the use of surveillance and its general human rights record in the Emirates?
We looked into this because one of the most recent news was regarding the Prime Minister of the Emirates, the Prince of Dubai, which used Pegasus, the NSO spyware, to monitor his ex-wife and her lawyers, which were based in the UK. And this was quite recent news, given a UK court claimed that this happened. So this was already one of the cases of abuse. But when we look more generally to the recent past of the UAE, we see, for example, that the presence of dark matter, this company, which was basically started off as at the beginning, there was a team of US citizens working for the UAE within Project Raven, which was a secret project that was developing tools to carry out surveillance on behalf of the UAE. This Project Raven later on ended up in the hands of Dark Matter, this Abu Dhabi-based company, which basically developed monitoring tools, spywares, to spy on nearby countries. For example, they spied on the Emirate of Qatar, but also on the citizens in the UAE. So we have a track record of violations done by digital technologies in the UAE, which is well known, well documented. There's been lots of investigations regarding this. And just recently, a human rights activist from Saudi Arabia sued Dark Matter and 3 US citizens that helped the company with giving out 0 days, so vulnerabilities that were meant to be used in order to inject the spyware. So we know that the UAE is prone to abuse this kind of technology, and it was really worrisome to see that Cyphergate was willing to sell to this country, albeit they were selling to this investment company, Mubadala, and also to the prince, to the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, which is the vice supreme commander of the UAE. And it was interesting, and also part of the difficulties in our investigation was that the company claimed that this technology was only going to be used for the corporate sector. So basically, according to them, they didn't sell this for governmental uses. But at the same time, from some articles that we found online, it was written that the Mohammed bin Zayed was going to use this platform, this business intelligence platform, for its personal interests, so to monitor what was happening around him. And this is quite concerning from our perspective.
And when you said that it's classified as a civilian product, that means that the Italian authorities have no say or insight into who it's sold to and no control over that. Is that right?
Exactly. Also in terms of possible pattern that the civil society can follow to try to understand what we have at stake in this case. I mean, the possibilities are very limited because we can't file any freedom of information request to any ministry because there are no license, no public license involved. So it's just a corporate contract between two parties, and it's a private matter. So basically, you can't get anything, even if there is at least partially a public state interest in the company. There's no way to change this. I mean, there's a huge problem of transparency every time that you came across civil goods like this.
And its other product, you said it was a form of spyware, so kind of similar to the one sold by NSO Group, which is quite notorious now, company based out of Israel that its products were used to target human rights defenders and journalists around the world, and they sell a similar product to that.
They have this product, but they didn't sell it to the UA. So they claim to have only sold the DSINT platform, so the social media intelligence, business intelligence platform. But what was really interesting, thanks to digging into the hacking team emails that were published years ago by WikiLeaks, is that we found a reference to one of the capabilities that this DSINT platform has. Basically, this platform can collect information from social medias, online, and other kind of databases, but they can also interface with data collected from lawful interception tools. This is why one of the emails between the CEO of Hacking Team and the then CEO of CipherGate, they were discussing about the possibility to integrate RCS. RCS is the platform developed by Hacking Team to basically carry out lawful interception. So what they were saying was like, we sell DSINT, this gathering platform to analyze information, but we can put on top of this also lawful interception tools. So we would like to integrate your platform into this one. So what does this mean? That they might be not carrying out interception themselves directly, CipherGate, but at the same time, they can easily collect, analyze, and provide you information based on intercepted data. And this is quite worrisome if we put this in perspective with respect to what we were previously talking about regarding the Emirates. Also, if we think to the past, they use the 3 different hacking tools against Ahmed Mansour, the so-called $1 million dissident, because the Emirates tried to hack into his devices using hacking team tools, FinSpy tools, and then NSA Pegasus as well. So this became also a matter of what the company declares to the states and what they actually are selling there. Because, for example, they told us it's civil goods, so there's no lawful interception, there's no technology in there that can be considered dual use. But then where should we draw the line? I mean, if this platform can suck into intercepted data, analyze this interception, and provide useful information to police agencies and other authorities in the Emirates, where should we draw the line? Is it really civil goods? And also, does social media intelligence, like collecting information openly available online, which the company itself says that this company, this data that we collect, it's not to be considered as private data, it's available online, so there's no real infringing on that. But then once again, this could be like monitoring activities of people that might be protesting against the Emirate government. So is that really only civil good? Because probably the dangers are quite real.
Well, I mean, definitely, if you kind of look at the amount of information you can get through open source materials, I mean, I think people would be shocked, A, at how much information you can get, and B, at what is actually considered open source techniques. Like, I mean, it goes well beyond, I think, people's expectations of what they could get. And I think, like, to say that it's just a purely civilian good and therefore isn't controlled isn't quite right, because it's one thing to have access to all the data, which is obviously a huge issue, but it's kind of meaningless unless you have this kind of black box software system that's able to analyze it and then basically give that intelligence to the customer. So it's absolutely pivotal, I think, in any state's kind of surveillance architecture, that DSINT system.
At least in this case, the company, we pushed the company to answer to this question, and they told us that they didn't provide these capabilities to the UAE. So once again, they're claiming that they only sold the decent platform used for social media intelligence, business intelligence, but there's no integration with intercepted data. This is what they stated to us.
Yeah. And also in the other case of foreign countries where you have the same technology, it's not clear exactly what technology they export for which purposes and where. Because, for example, they mentioned just a region in Central Europe and South America, but they don't mention any specific countries. And there could be potentially sensible countries for these technologies, like Mexico, for example, or Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan in Central Asia. And I mean, this is another lack of transparency that we noticed during the investigation.
And to be clear, this level of transparency isn't just important so we know what the company is doing and who it's selling to. It's like a key safeguard when it comes to protecting people's rights around the world, because if we don't know what that company is selling and to who, then we don't know the kind of risks that are associated with that. And then particularly if it is like a controlled technology, whether the government that's authorizing that technology is doing so correctly, basically, if it's following its own laws and policies. So we need that level of transparency to know if it's following its own rules. And over the decades, we kind of got to a decent level with that with regards to military and arms exports. So for example, in Italy and in other countries, you would be able to see if they were selling fighter jets to a country. If government's authorities had negotiated a contract, then they would have to, for example, tell Parliament, tell the public, and that would be a matter of public discussion. But with these kind of surveillance tools, there's just no transparency input. So you can't have that level of discussion with their government agencies. And that stops that kind of protection being put in place with these types of technologies. So stepping back from Cyphergate for a minute, is the Italian surveillance sector, is that quite large or is it relatively few companies?
The sector is actually quite large. We have lots of companies selling this kind of surveillance technologies, and they're also famous abroad. If, for example, we look at the agenda of international events such as the ISS that takes place in Europe, in Prague, but also like in the South Asia, we see a couple of interesting and famous companies such as ARIA, IPS, that sell this kind of technology. And one of the reasons why we can think of these large markets, large environment, is because probably in Italy, thanks to the activities carried out by public prosecutors and so on, there is a freemium market of these technologies. For example, in one of the slides that we got from Cyphergate, the company estimates that there's a market value regarding lawful interception in Italy around 36.3 million euros. And they were trying to get into this market, signing a contract with another company that was already selling these technologies to public prosecutor offices, which is called SIO. So this is quite interesting. Could you see that this market, that it's self-sustaining itself, public prosecutor offices need to do this kind of interception activities. At the same time, there are companies that are pushing for this, and new companies that are born later on. For example, Cyphergate was founded in 2014. They're trying to put their foot inside this market, signing this contract, trying to leverage other connections and so on. So the market in Italy is quite big. We see maybe companies falling down. If you think, for example, regarding Hacking Team, which after being hacked, they've been acquired by another company and now changed their name into Memento Labs. But we see also newer ones coming forward and also expanding even abroad. So this is like a concern in Italy, at least.
When you say they were kind of developed or kind of trading to serve the public prosecutors, do you know the legal framework around that? Do you generally need like a warrant or judicial oversight for any type of surveillance activity in Italy?
You have to ask a judge, which is in charge to to evaluate the preliminary investigation for an authorization for every interception and every wiretapping that the prosecutor wants to do. So there is always a judge who has to approve the movement and the choices of the prosecutor.
And it's just one kind of safeguard, but there's obviously all kinds of issues even with that system. But then when you're talking about these companies then selling these exact same products to countries that lack basic rule of law, where you know this intelligence agency is essentially there to keep those in power, you know, the idea that it's the same system that be used for the exact same purposes for, you know, in the public interest is just kind of a fantasy, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and there is also the problem of the ownership of the data that are intercepted, the wiretappings and this kind of stuff, which is not so clear even in Italy. There are cases like with another company, Area, where basically the same wiretappings that used by the prosecutor were also stored in a server which was owned by the company itself, and that was a really big problem because according to the law, this sensitive data should be stored only in infrastructure owned by the state and by the prosecutors. So even in Italy, you can have gray areas. I can't imagine what kind of what could be the possible outcome in countries like the UAE or Mexico or the other that we mentioned before.
Absolutely. So Leonardo also comes up in the second investigation, doesn't it?
Yeah. It comes up because we were trying to look into the think tank sector, because this is one of the ways to promote the surveillance industry and to explain the importance of the surveillance industry in the world. And Leonardo obviously is pioneering all the market in Italy. And the company has just set up their own think tank called the Medor, which is chaired by a former interior minister in Italy, who is Marco Minniti. And this combination is really interesting and fascinating from the Italian perspective, because we have one of the interior minister who basically invested more in all the security narratives during his mandate, who is now chairing the leading think tank of the leading company in the surveillance and security and defense sector in Italy. And since the very beginning, it was very clear that the aim of the think tank was to promote the Italian system, where once again the same that we mentioned before. So these capacity of the Italian companies to collaborate together in order to promote a complete product to secure communication, to surveil people, to control borders, every kind of need that you can have. The idea is to promote a kind of made in Italy also in this field. And one of the interesting thing that we discovered during this investigation is also the fact that Cyphergate is selling one of their products to Medor, and this product is the DSynth technology. So once again, social media analysis, open source intelligence, all this stuff for Medor is provided by this tool made by Cyphergate. And another interesting thing concerning Minniti and his presence in a Leonardo think tank is the fact that Minniti, when he was interior minister, he was promoting border control and every kind of system to monitor the sea border with the aim to prevent migrants to cross the Mediterranean Sea on one side. And on the other side, he was promoting also a new border management system for the southern border of Libya. Even if he was interior minister, so he was supposed to deal with the interior affairs, he was very keen on dealing with foreign countries. And this kind of international status that he has was among his skills, and this was one of the reasons why he was the one chosen by Leonardo to chair these think tanks. In the list of greetings that he received from different countries, we noticed that every time he was thanked as friend, he was introduced by other ministries as a friend, as someone very close to their country. And within the list of activities, of the first activities done by Medor, we can see, for example, scholarship in Morocco, but also the export of some technologies in order to control coronavirus in Niger, which is one of the countries where Minniti was more present during his mandate. So these kind of interaction between the corporate sector and politics, in the case of Medor, seems pretty new for the Italian context, because this is the first time when a corporate has his own think tank as a sole shareholder, basically, and it seems also a way to try to change the way Italy runs its diplomatic relationship with some countries, because the trade-off provided by a think tank like Medor could be different from the trade-off that you can have from an official part of the government. But this political connection with Minniti is really clear, and it's really solid as well.
It's like such a brazen nexus between the corporate and government sector, and you can only imagine what kind of initiatives they'd be recommending. I'm guessing they're not recommending safer routes for people to come to Europe.
Exactly, and the other interesting thing is that they are trying to sell technology as a political solution for very complex problems like migration. Or from my personal opinion, I think that this is the most problematic aspect of these think tanks, because they are trying to overcome in some ways politics and the political solution, because they're trying to sell something else that looks like technical or technological, but it has its own political consequences.
And do you think they're kind of explicitly trying to follow a US model? Because these kind of think tanks are quite prevalent in the US, right?
Yeah, exactly. We had an interview with an analyst in Italy who wrote a book about think tanks, And the Anglo-Saxon model, especially the American one, but also the British one, are the model for Minniti, actually, since the very beginning. In Italy, usually think tanks are basically PR agency for politicians. That's how they work usually. Minniti was the first one who tried to set up a think tank which was more focused on corporate and on intelligence as well. He invited former members of the army as well to join his former think tank when he was still a politician. And he chose to join Leonardo when he quit from the Italian parliament. And that's another interesting aspect. Usually, these kind of connection are built during the period of time when a politician is at the parliament. Not in this case, because Minniti tried to make things somehow clearer, and he wants to stand for a company rather than for a party or a parliament.
And you mentioned there Libya and Niger. I think in your piece you called it the Europe's southern border. With
Minniti and with other interior ministries, one of the attempt of the Italian government was to externalize the control of the border and to try to draw the Italian border southern and southern every time. Basically, the idea is to give the technology to manage the borders to countries who lack this kind of technology in exchange for basically the control of the migrants. The aim is always to stop the migration flows towards Italy. And this strategy has been initiated in 2015 with the EU Africa Summit in Malta. And Italy was always pioneering this kind of diplomatic relationship with the African countries. The framework is always tackling the root of migration, but in reality, the trade-off is always a technological cooperation between Italy and these countries in order to prevent migration flows towards Italy. And Niger and Libya are among the key countries for this strategy. Niger, because it's a transit countries, and Libya because it's the main departure of the migrants coming from the Mediterranean Sea to Italy.
And what is the treatment of people inside Libya, particularly with regards to its security forces?
According to the UN panelist of the UN panel of experts of Libya, these people are treated like slaves, basically, and the human rights are constantly violated within the detention centers in Libya. And despite all the reports and all the accusation made at international conferences, at the international level, against these security forces in Libya, Italy is keeping on financially sustaining these detention centers. And one of the framework is border control, and the money which are destined to these security forces are European money as well, because they come from not just from the Italian budget, but also from the European Trust Fund set up in order to tackle the migration route. I think that this is one of the outrageous cases where you can see quite clearly cooperation money diverted to support technology and technology provided to security forces, which are also violating human rights. But still, despite all the discussion also within the Italian parliament, the financial support for the Libyan forces is still there.
And I guess one aspect of your report that I find so interesting is that we usually kind of think of these as government policies, the government basic trade-off that they're saying, we know this is going to lead to human rights abuses, but we're going to do it anyway because our main priority is stopping migration. But I guess what your report exposes is just the kind of risk of a corporate influence within this kind of decision-making that's going on in the background that I think most citizens, I mean, certainly I don't really have any insight into.
Yeah, exactly. And this corporate influence, I think, was there since the very beginning. Now it's clearer, also because the infrastructure to influence this diplomatic discussion between countries is more complex now, and but it's probably also more efficient. At the beginning, also, once again, in the case of Libya, it was simply Silvio Berlusconi, for example, in 2008, who was presenting the border surveillance system provided by Selex, which is part of the Leonardo Group, by the way. Berlusconi presented this system to Gaddafi because he was at the time the president of Libya, and he did it in simply as a friend of Gaddafi, and this was one of the possible trade-off of the agreement in order to stop migration, and the agreement was the one of 2008. Now, this influence must be framed in a different way. It must be more complex than simply the prime minister who is saying to his friend, "Look, we have this technology you can use to stop migrants."
And what kind of work do you think IRPI Media will be focusing on in the coming months and year?
I think that this influence of the corporate to the political choices and the diplomatic relationship should be one of the main topic. We try to dig into the relationship also of Eni, the oil and gas company in Italy, because this company is the other major player to influence the diplomacy of Italy. And in that case, the impact is on the environment, probably because of the nature of Eni. With Leonardo is the aspect that is affected is the one of security and defense and surveillance as well. And I mean, I think that this is the kind of investigative reporting that could affect politics in a different way, not just talking, not just exposing personal scandals, but trying to investigate on more systematic subjects.
Yeah, and also something that emerged from the stories of Cyphergate and Medor is this theme of health surveillance, which is directly connected to the pandemic. And this would be something worth following because at the peak of the pandemic, or let's say at the beginning of the pandemic, lots of technological solutions were proposed, both within companies and at large, to be used by governments. And it's interesting to see, as 2 years already has passed, what kind of solutions are still in place, what companies are still offering. So Cybergate is offering a tool which is called HITS, in which its aim is to monitor close contacts between people. It's an app that you install on your device. And health surveillance was a theme of the recent articles brought by Medor. So they're saying like, okay, we are financing scholarships and so on, but also the subject of health surveillance is something to bear in mind. It's something we should leverage somehow, because you go to foreign countries and you show how health surveillance has become an issue. It's important to monitor, and it's going to be like, I think, quite interesting to see how these will develop in the following years.
And it's quite convenient that their solution to COVID also involves more surveillance and them making money. I guess it's a happy coincidence. Riccardo and Lorenzo, I mean, the kind of themes that you touched upon there, the corporate capture of policymaking, it's like, it's so easy to happen nowadays. And like really one of the best safeguards that we have against it is investigative journalism and the kind of stuff that you guys are doing. So thank you so much, even if it is quite a risky domain for you guys to be in, but hopefully less risky than the mafia, I guess. So thank you so much. Where can people find the articles?
You can find articles on irpmedia.irpi.eu. And we have also a part of the website which is in English. So you also, for English reader, we will provide articles.
Brilliant. And we have links as well on privacyinternational.org as ever. Thank you guys so much.